Okay, we're continuing the Sikha on page 571. We're in the middle of a subject. We're holding where it says, V'zui gam ha'hasbara. It's the first column. Look at the first column of page 571 in the end of the column. What's the Rebbe discussing here? The Rebbe is discussing in general the many arguments that we find in Mishnah and Gemara, and then the final Psak Halacha, who we paskin like. Specifically, the Rebbe is discussing the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So the point the Rebbe makes is, the Gemara tells us, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elokim chayim, that of course both opinions come from the Eibishter himself. When the Eibishter himself was teaching Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, Hashem himself showed Moshe Rabbeinu, the expression of the Medrash is, Memtes panim tamei, Memtes panim Torah. That you can give 49 reasons why this is tamei and 49 reasons why this is Torah. So from there comes the opinions of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and so on. Now, when you have to paskin, what's the rule in a psak halacha? Who do you paskin like? You always paskin like the Rav. Pasuk says, Acher Rab Lahatay. So they take account and they see you as the majority. That's the psak halacha. But there's an interesting thing that it says regarding Beis Shammai, that there was a baskel that came out in Shemayim to say that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So the question Tosfos asks is, why do you need a baskel? Not only you don't need a baskel because Beis Hillel is the majority, but you're not allowed to rely on a baskel. So what's this concept of a baskel? So Tosfos explains that over here there was a suffix because Beis Shammai were harifi, they were very, very sharp. They were able to answer every question on their opinion. So because of their harifos, there was a svara to say that we're going to paskin like Beis Shammai even though they're minority. And that's why the baskel came out to confirm that even in this case, we're paskening like Rav. So we're not really relying on the baskel. You can't rely on a baskel. We're relying on the rule of paskening like Rav. We're just using the baskel because in this case, there was a doubt, maybe we should not follow the regular rule of Rav. So the baskel is confirming, no, we are. That's the thing that the Rebbe speaks about here. A baskel is a heavenly voice. Heavenly voice comes and announces something.
It's more like an asmach.
Sort of, yeah, right. But we're not really relying on it completely. It's based on the rule of Rav. So let's continue inside. Zui gama asbara about pluktis Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. So this Bechlal explains the many machlokes we find in Shas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Shebiribuya halachas shenechluke behem. In most of the halachas where there's an argument between them, noitim Beis Shammai lechumra or Beis Hillel lekula. Beis Shammai is stringent and Beis Hillel is lenient. Why is this? All of these subjects where you have one approach, you can approach it with a more lenient approach, which is a chesed approach, or you can approach it with a more stringent approach, a more gvura approach, l'chumra or l'kula. Nitiya sichlam, the way their mind worked, the way they wired their understanding. Nitiya sichlam means naturally, the way they think, the way they approach things. B'teva briyasam. And the way their intellect was working is all in sync with the sheirish of their neshama, as it's explained in many places that Beis Hillel comes from chesed and Beis Shammai comes from gvura. So generally, Beis Shammai is always going to be stringent and Beis Hillel always lenient. Other adds b'derech klal because there are exceptions. There's many mishnas that are taught in Masechta Idiyos, where there it brings all of the cases where Beis Shammai is the one that's lenient and Beis Hillel is the one that's stringent. So usually Beis Shammai is gvura, Beis Hillel is chesed. But we know that chesed itself has gvura in it. It's gvura shebe chesed and there's chesed shebe gvura. So sometimes the gvura of Beis Shammai will also be mekel. Well, there's chesed there as well, but not usually though. This is the point that explains all the arguments of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether it was stringent or lenient. This is the teva of their neshama l'mayla, but not only the teva of their neshama l'mayla. That's not enough. You cannot paskin based on the teva of your neshama l'mayla, but because of the teva of their neshama, this is also the way their intellect functioned. They had a koyach to think in this kind of an approach. Right, so Rebbe here, this answer is a question that is asked in other places. How could we say The Beishamai paskins based on Gvura, the Neshama Lamaila is Gvura, and Beis Hillel paskins based on Chesed, which is Neshama Lamaila. It should be based on the merits of the concept, how you understand it, how you approach it. You can't paskin based on the Shadish of your Neshama. The answer is the Shadish of your Neshama also it affects, it colors your thinking. Right? When you see a certain Rav, he's always a Machmer, and you see another Rav, he's always a Mekel. Doesn't mean that they're not following what it says in the Sfarim and the Paiskim. They're using their own feelings and their own leanings and the way they look at things. No, not necessarily. They're looking in the Sefer. They're looking what it says in the Paiskim. A Rav that the Shadish of his Neshama comes from Chesed, so the way he thinks, the way his intellect works, he'll see Chesed. He'll find a way how to be Mekel. A person that the Shadish of his Neshama is Gvura, he'll look at the very same place, the very same Paiskim, and he'll come out with an opposite approach. He'll see a reason to be stringent. Right? Okay, so that's over here the difference between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So usually the actual psak halach is kedas haroiv, as the Rebbe mentioned before. We go according to the majority. Achri rabim lahatois, as the pasuk says that we go after the majority. U'b'makim sheyesh safek b'achras haroiv, and in this case between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, there was a doubt whether you should use that usual rule of following the roiv. Because Beis Shammai, which were in the minority, but nevertheless they were sharper, they were smarter. So here you rely on a baskel to paskin like Beis Hillel. Okay, so this is all bisman hazeh. Now v'hinei klal zeh, this rule sha'alacha ki Beis Hillel, that we always paskin like Beis Hillel, and this goes so far. Va'at sheBeis Shammai b'mokim Beis Hillel ein a mishnah. The words of Beis Shammai that are taught together with Beis Hillel are completely disregarded. It's as if it's like not even there, part of the Mishnah. This is something that's only said regarding Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. You don't say this regarding any other machlokes between any Tanaim and Amirayim. There's always two opinions, and there's a credibility to each opinion, even if we're passing like one opinion. But by the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the psak halacha like Beis Hillel is to the extent that we completely disregard Beis Shammai's opinion. However, ein ela b'zman hazeh, this is only today. When Mashiach comes, tia halacha ke Beis Shammai. Then the halacha will be like Beis Shammai, which is something that's already brought in the Rebbe's Mitzayin over here, the Mar Makaimis in Order 58. It's brought in Medrash Shmuel on Pirkei Yavis. It's brought in Mikdash Melech, which is a Kabbalah Sefer on the Zohar, and the Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah, when the Alter Rebbe discusses the machlokes between Moshe Rabbeinu and Kairach, or Kairach really, Kairach which made this machlokes on Moshe Rabbeinu. So there the Alter Rebbe brings in the sin, and he says, Kairach wanted to paskin like Beis Shammai. He wanted the Gvura should be ikar like Beis Shammai's opinion. And then he saw what's going to be lost at Lava. He saw the koyach of Beis Shammai's opinion, and he wanted it to be then. Couldn't wait, didn't have time to wait until lost at Lava. That was his mistake.
Why would this be that they should be?
Oh, this is all going to be explained. So now, why would this change? Why lost at Lava is Beis Shammai's opinion? Why to be more machmer? It's all going to be explained in the Sikha. But first, the Rebbe will explain a basic question that the Rebbe discussed earlier in the Sikha. How can we change a psak halacha? If they already took account, and there's a roiv, and they paskin, so what's going to happen lost at Lava? How is it all of a sudden going to change? That the halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai.
And we say Torah doesn't change. And
Torah doesn't change. So it can't be through some kind of a nevuah or some kind of a. It has to be al piklolei Torah. So what's going to happen? So the Rebbe explains like similar to what we learned before regarding the heter of shchita, of shechting the sherabar with the fins of the snapper of the levyasa. Shlema bir bezeh. So here similar. The pshat is as follows. L'chayre, you may ask, ki mishnivska halacha ke Beis Hillel kedas haroiv. Once we pass today like Beis Hillel, which is the majority. How could there be a change in the future that then will pass like Beis Shammai? Seemingly opposite of the rule that we have to follow the majority. So the answer is, so here the Rebbe says, what's going to happen? The halacha will only change to become like Beis Shammai. The Bezdin HaGadol in Yerushalayim, after Mashiach comes, will take account again. And then the majority opinion of the Bezdin in Yerushalayim, which is the Bezdin in the Beis HaMikdash, the Bezdin the Sanhedrin, which is of 71 people, they're going to come to the conclusion that Allah is like Beis Shammai. So then, we're not just going to disregard Beis Hillel's opinion and change. You can't just change it. The reason why they're going to change this psak din is kivin sha'oz hiya das harev kibeshamai. The Rav will change. The majority of the Sanhedrin will have a different opinion than the majority that there was in the time when Beishamai and Basil discussed this. That's what's going to happen.
Why are you doing a recount?
Why are we doing a
I'm not happy
recount?
with the previous vote. I want a recount.
Why are they going to do a recount? Okay, so that's a good question. So the Rebbe will explain that Lasad Lavai, the matzav is going to change, and there'll be a reason to be more machmer, even though you might think that the opposite should be true. When Mashiach comes, we shouldn't be more machmer. If anything, there would be maybe a reason to be more lenient. All of the chumres of Beishamai are usually out of a concern that if you're not going to be extra stringent, a person may come to be over on a certain avei, on a lav, and an aveda, or you may not do the mitzvah properly. So Lasad Lavai, there's much less of a concern, there's much less of a reason to be stringent. So it seems like Lasad Lavai, the matzav should demand to be more lenient. But that's coming soon in the Sikhet. The Rebbe will explain that the matzav Lasad Lavai will call for a recount. And not just, this is not something that happens in any other generation where all of a sudden we're taking a recount. Lasad Lavai, then there'll be a reason to make this recount, and the Bezdin will, and the Rav will be like Beishamai. The Rebbe adds details to this in the Order 60. What's the pshat of this recount? And that we're relying on a new Rav of the Sanhedrin Lasad Lavai. Take a look what the Rebbe says. Order 60. This is understood with a kavachayim. Kavachayim, in other words, if there's other cases where this is done, and here it's even stronger that this could be done. So, Bezin Gadol Shadarshu Ba'achas Min Amidois. If the Bezin Gadol is learning a pasuk in the Torah, and they darshan a certain pasuk in the Torah based on one of the midas, one of the methods of darshaning, right? We have the Yud Gimel midas HaTorah in the Dresher span, and they darshan according to one of those methods in the pasuk. Kifi Mashanire Be'inayim Shadin Kach. And therefore they come to a certain conclusion that this is the halacha. Shebinyanim Ke'elu, Pligi Beishamai Basil, also regarding such matters, Beishamai and Basil will argue. V'danu din, and because of this drasha in the pasuk, they paskin a certain halacha. This is all quoting here from the Rambam. And then what happened, continuing on the next page, on page 572, for Amad Achrei and Bezdin Acher, a later generation, another Bezdin is here, and Venira Loitam Acher Lister, and they have now a different approach, and they have a reason why to contradict or to not accept the drasha the way the previous Bezdin darshaned it. Harei ze soiser v'don kifi mashenira be'einov. So this new Bezdin could be mevatel what the previous Bezdin darshaned, and he can paskin now the way it seems right to him. Shenema, as the pasuk says, ala shoifit, ela shoifit, that is ashiyeh bayomim ahem. That when you go to a judge, you go to the Bezdin, you could only follow what the Bezdin understands in the generation that you're living in. Which means, ein chachayev leleches ela achri Bezdin shebederach. You only have to follow the Bezdin in your generation. A previous Bezdin interpreted and understood the psuk in one way. A later generation, which has this Bezdin, you have to follow the Bezdin of that generation. Okay, but this is specifically, the Rambam there is talking about interpreting the psukim of the Torah and therefore creating a certain halacha based on this interpretation. So over here, the Rambam says you have to follow the Bezdin in your generation. Now, the Rebbe continues, Valachas kama v'kama, how much more so, most definitely, this will be true when there's a Bezdin of a later generation, which is Gadol min harishayim b'chachmo b'minyan. When the generation of the Bezdin of a later generation is actually a greater Bezdin. They're wiser and they're larger in number. Sha'az, most definitely, Yachal Avatal Gam Gzeire Oitakane Uminik Shapashat B'chal Yisrael. So this new Bezdin could nullify any decree, any institution, any custom, even including something that it was already Pashat B'chal Yisrael, meaning all Yidden do this, all Yidden follow this. It's much easier for a new Bezdin to undo a certain psak din of a previous Bezdin that was not Pashat B'chal Yisrael. They're not all Yidden are following. And the Gemara discusses such kind of scenarios where there was an earlier Bezdin that made a certain gzeira and it wasn't accepted, and a later Bezdin came and revoked it. But when you have a gzeira that was Pashat in the entire Klal Yisrael, it's not so easy to undo such a gzeira of Bezdin. Right? Now the point is, what the Rambam is saying is, it's more difficult to undo a gzeira and a takana of a previous Bezdin than to come and reinterpret a certain drasha of a pasuk. A drasha of a pasuk, for that the Torah tells us, the way you understand the psukim of the Torah, you have to go to the Bezdin in your generation and follow what they say. You don't necessarily need a Bezdin that's going to be wiser and larger in number to undo the understanding of a pasuk in a previous generation. However, when it comes to a takana, a gzeira, or a minig that Chazal instituted, here the Bezdin to revoke, to undo the previous takana, you're going to have a larger Bezdin, both in knowledge and wisdom, and a larger Bezdin in size and in their ability to be able to undo a previous takana. Okay, so now, what's going to be lost of love? The Bezdin in Yerushalayim, lost of love in the Beis HaMikdash. They're going to be the greatest Bezdin of all times. There's never any Bezdin, including the times of the Tanaim and Amirayim, the Bezdin that's going to be lost of love in the Beis HaMikdash, that's going to be the greatest Bezdin. And the Rebbe here explains this. Let's take a look now in the star on the bottom of the page. There's no absolute proof for this, but it's logical to say. See what I'm saying in the reading in the bottom of the page? It's definitely logical to say. The Bezdin, the great Bezdin in Yerushalayim, in the Beis HaMikdash, in the future, they'll be greater of all other Bezdins, of all previous generations, with their wisdom and in number. Because since then in the future, so now the Rambam tells us then all Yidden will be great wise men. So it's not only the Bezdin itself; everybody will have great wisdom. So therefore, minyan chachmei ador she maskimim. Okay, it's not so clear the word over here. So therefore, the number of the chachamim of the generation that are going to agree, umekablim, and will accept divrei Bezdin, the words of the Bezdin, as the Rambam there says, Gadol b'minyan, I'm skipping the parentheses, Gadol yoser, so it's definitely going to be greater, minyan chachmei ador, of the number of all the wise, the chachamim of previous generations, shekiblu divrei Bezdin b'chol ador shlefnei zeh. In other words, the Rebbe here is clarifying an obvious question, which the Rambam explains. What does this mean that we have a Bezdin that's larger in number? What's that supposed to mean? The number of the Bezdin is set. The number of the Bezdin is 71. You can't have a Bezdin larger than 71. That's how large the Sanhedrin is in Yerushalayim. So what does it mean that you have a Bezdin in a later generation that's larger? The answer is, besides the actual Bezdin, there are other Chachamim that are not part of the Bezdin, but they're also great Chachamim. So when you have the Chachamim that are outside the Bezdin, that support and agree and accept what the Bezdin says, we count them in the number of Chachamim that agree to this halacha as well. So la'asad lava, when Yidden are going to be great Chachamim, so what the Bezdin will paskin then will be also relying on all the Yidden, on all the great Chachamim la'asad lava that are going to agree to the Bezdin. In the times of the Tanaim and Amirayim, the Yidden were not Chachamim Gedolim like it's going to be la'asad lava. So therefore, the number of Chachamim that are going to agree to the Bezdin amongst Klal Yisrael, even those that are not in the Bezdin, will also be much greater. That's number one. Now, the other point is, this is regarding the number of the Bezdin. Ve'elu sheyivcharu mikol Yisrael, who are going to be the chosen men from all of Klal Yisrael, sheyich Chachamim Gedolim, that all Yidden will be great wise people. The Bezdin HaGadol, to actually be in the Bezdin HaGadol, bevadai yiyich Chachamim hachi Gedolim. Those that are chosen to join the actual Bezdin, the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, they're going to be the greatest Chachamim. Yoser ma'adayr shalefnei zeh, much more of any previous generations. I'm reading towards the bottom of the page. You see over here, middle of this paragraph. V'alachas kama v'kama, and most definitely Shiraish HaYeshiva, the head of the yeshiva of all the Chachamim, and the Av Bezdin, Hanasi Shai Mitachas Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's the leader, and also including also the Nasi, which is in the place of Moshe Rabbeinu. And who is this? Melech HaMashiach, Mashiach himself. Yeh muflig b'chachme yoser. He'll have much greater wisdom, much greater. Muflig means an abundance more of wisdom. Mikola Av Bezdins b'doire shalefnei zeh. More than any Av Bezdin, more than any of the leaders of the Bezdins in previous generations. And the Rebbe quotes it. The Rambam says this in Pirush HaMishnayos and another place beferish. Kailul gam mi Moshe Rabbeinu. Even being wiser than Moshe Rabbeinu himself. How do we know this? Sharei Mashiach yilamed Torah gam matanoim v'amiroim v'chulu u'Moshe Rabbeinu. Mashiach is going to be the teacher of all Klal Yisrael. He's going to teach Torah to all the greatest Tanoim and Amiroim, including Moshe Rabbeinu, including the Avos. They're all going to come to hear Torah from Mashiach. So therefore, la'asad lavai, definitely the Bezdin and Mashiach are going to have more chachma than there was in any previous generations, and also the number of people that are going to support and accept what the Bezdin says will also be greater. So therefore, you could change the psak din. You could change the psak din from Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai. Okay, let's go back inside the Sikha on the top of the page 572 on top of the page. Now, the question though is, why are we changing to Beis Shammai's opinion? Before the Rebbe explains why we're going to be more stringent, Lasad Lave, but what's the idea of changing to Beis Shammai's opinion? So the Rebbe explains this. B'tama davar shel Lasad Lave yishtane shikul adas l'chachmi Yisrael lintais ladas Beis Shammai. So to explain why in the future, so now the thinking is going to change. So then they're going to see all Chachmei Yisrael, all of the wise amongst Eden are going to see that Beis Shammai is right. What's the reason for this? So this brings us back to what the Gemara said before. The truth is, Beis Shammai was sharper in their learning than Beis Hillel. The level of learning and the wisdom of Torah of Beis Shammai was greater than the wisdom of Beis Hillel. So really, Beis Shammai is on a higher level. So why don't we paskin like Beis Shammai today? So before we said the reason is because Beis Hillel was the Rav, right? The number of people that agreed to Beis Hillel was larger. But really, we have to question that itself. If Beis Shammai was actually smarter and they were sharper, so why is it that the Rav followed Beis Hillel? You would expect that the majority should join the camp, Beis Shammai, the yeshiva of Beis Shammai, that was sharper and smarter. So what's the reason? So the Rebbe explains, and we find that the reason is, and the Rebbe is going to bring you a very interesting that it says in the Gemara. Today, we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, because most of the Chachamim, and they're pasking only according to what they understand. They didn't reach this level. Beis Shammai was so smart and so sharp, most of the Chachamim in their time did not get the depth of what they're saying, so they couldn't agree to them. Again, all going back to the klal of way Torah works. You could only paskin something if you understand that this is the way it is. Even if you have a great Rebbe like Shammai and the whole yeshiva of Beis Shammai, and you know that they're so wise and they definitely have the best reasoning for their opinion, but if you don't understand it, you can't join their opinion. So therefore, the Rav of the Chachamim that did not get see the depth of Beis Shammai's opinion, said they couldn't pass him like Beis Shammai. Where do we find such a concept? So the Rebbe brings a Gemara that says this. Well, Derech Maimer Azal, the Gemara says, Shulekavu halacha kerab Meir, that the halacha does not follow Rab Meir, even though the Gemara itself tells us in his generation there was nobody as great as Rab Meir. And the reason is because all of his colleagues were unable to get the depth of his opinions. They didn't understand it. They knew that he's much greater than them, but nevertheless they couldn't understand it. So this is an unbelievable, again, going back to the point that Rebbe says before, this is an unbelievable thing. When it comes to Torah, even if you can rely on a great Rebbe you have, and you know that what he's saying is true, but nevertheless, you can't paskin without seichel, without understanding it. The Eibishter gave us Torah, we need to understand Torah. Havana Basaga, comprehend it. If not, you can't paskin. So therefore, we don't paskin like Reb Meir, and we also don't paskin like Beis Shammai today. But in the future, Sheyiyah Kol Yisrael, all Yid, Palachas Kama v'Kama, most definitely, Elu Sheyivchuru Mikol Yisrael, Bezna Gadol Shebirushalayim, those that are chosen to be part of the great Bezna Yerushalayim, Chachamim Gedolim. So they're going to be the great wise people. Tia Eitzel Rubam. So then the majority of Yidden, Ve'ulai Eitzel Kulam. The Rebbe asks, perhaps not only majority, but even everybody will see this. Mailas HaChacham de Beis Shammai Shemachad Ditvei. We'll reach that level. We'll see the depth of the sharpness of Beis Shammai's opinion. So therefore then we will paskin like Beis Shammai, again, all within the framework of Klali HaTorah that you have to follow Rav, and then the Rav will change because we'll see the depth of Beis Shammai's opinion.
So that's the chesed. The Rav wasn't able to understand that level of mind.
Correct.
So the chesed wasn't that we went according to them. The ones that were not
Beis
able to understand.
Correct.
Right.
Lasad Labai will be greater chachma, and we'll see the depth of Beis Shammai's opinion.
But that's the same also that Beis Hillel didn't understand.
Correct. Beis Hillel was on a different level. They were not as sharp as Beis Shammai. Correct. So let's conclude the inyan. So the bottom line is that the reason why there's going to be a change in the halachas of Torah when Mashiach comes, it's because this is not going to be out of the framework of Torah. This is all within the framework of Torah because of the change in the nature of people's understanding. This is going to be a result of a completely different level of learning Torah. And then, so we'll see a deeper, and we'll appreciate and understand a deeper level in Torah, so we could pass like Beshamai. Because we will see a deeper level in the understanding of Torah, like the opinion of Beshamai, which was sharper. So the Rebbe now connects this to the point that we learned before in the Sikha. Al derech or bedugmas, this is similar, and like we said before, heter, shchitas, sheira bar, the fact that we're going to allow to shech the sheira bar b'sanpirei alivyasan, with the fins of the livyasan, even though it's not a proper knife. The sheira bar is a large ox that's going to be used to shecht for the meat that's going to be served at the festive meal when Mashiach comes. And how is this sheira bar going to be slaughtered? With the fins of the livyasan, which is a large fish, and its fins. However, this is going to happen. If it's going to happen b'derech nes, but the point is that it's a kind of shechita which b'zman hazeh is not allowed. But la'asad lavai, this shechita will be accepted, as we said before. This Torah chadash emiti teitze. There'll be a new level of learning Torah. So the Rebbe explained earlier in the Sikha, this is not out of the framework of Torah, but with the koyach of seichel of the learning that we'll see la'asad lavai, we will see how this will be the halacha regarding the shechita, that you're allowed to shecht with the sampiri alavyasa. So it's the same thing also with Beishamai. Okay. Stop over here today, but just again to tell you, we're not going to be learning next week because next week is Rosh Hashanah. But the next time we learn, the Rebbe will explain what's taka the pshat of this. Why lasad lavai? Are we going to be more machmer like Beishamai? We're going to become more stringent. We're going to be more concerned that people are not going to listen to the Torah. Why lasad lavai will we be more machmer? That's coming in the next part of the Sikha.
Is there going to be a new Torah? Is there going to be a new Torah?
What's new? So this is the whole Indian that we learned throughout this entire Sikha. There's no new Torah. So, my pleasure. Okay.